Hello, I'm Michelle with the Kingsport Senior Center, and we're here today with the Sentimental Journey with Shelby. Shelby, thank you for talking with us today.
Hi everybody, glad to talk to you. We're going to talk about this B-17 behind me. It was built in 1944. It's a Boeing design, but it was actually built by the Douglas Company.
Wow.
And she went over to the Pacific in 1945 and got there too late to see combat. So the reason that because she was late is the reason she exists. Because all of the B-17s that were over there were already so torn up they never brought them home. Now General MacArthur liked to use B-17s to fly between the islands. We don't have paperwork that says he flew on this one, but this was a brand new plane versus all the torn up ones. So you can figure out which one he was going to be using. And then because this aircraft has camera wells, they used to take actually bomb footage. When they were dropping the bombs, they would be running cameras. So since it had the camera wells and the war was over, they used our plane to do aerial mapping of the Philippine Islands. And then they tried an experiment. They were going to try to use B-17s to do air-sea rescue. They hung a wooden boat underneath the fuselage to be dropped into the ocean. Well, you might as well fly down the middle of the runway because things do not gently splash into the ocean. And so that didn't work very well. Then they brought her back to the United States and they put her in retirement in Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Tucson, Arizona. And then in the mid-50s, they brought her back out because we were still doing above-ground nuclear testing. And they wanted to find out what would happen if you flew an airplane into a nuclear blast. So they took two B-17s. This one became the mothership. They put all the instruments and everything inside of her. And she remotely controlled the second B-17 into the blast. Well, we now know that a B-17, because it's all aluminum, melts if you fly it into a nuclear blast. Then she was sent back to the States, and the government decided they didn't need her anymore, so they sold her to a company in California. And for 18 years, she fought forest fires. So they welded a tank that made her, and they made her into a slurry bomber. But everything that made her look like a bomber disappeared. So after 18 years of working as a slurry bomber, they sold her as scrap metal. Two guys were trying to get her. One guy literally wanted to make her beer cans. The other guy had the dream of bringing her back to life. Luckily, he won. Personally bought it, flew it back to Mesa, Arizona, and then for 18 years, we worked on her to make her back into a bomber again. So this, according to the Wings channel, we are the most authentically restored B-17 of those capable of flight. And at the time they said that, there were 12 flying. Today there are only 5 flying. So talking about the plane, at the very nose of the aircraft, and you can walk around with your camera later if you'd like, the very nose of the airplane is a plexiglass bubble. That's where the Bombardier sat. Then just behind him and off to his left was a table, is where the navigator compartment was. Then you have to crawl for a short distance, and you'll get up to where the pilot and the co-pilot were. And then the flight crew chief stood between them, straddling that big hole in the floor with his hands on the throttles. And everybody on the plane, with the exception of the pilot and co-pilot, also had a gun position. So your Bombardier control what they call the chin guns, the 2 guns that stick directly out the front. Your navigator controlled the 2 cheek guns that come out either side. Your flight crew chief turned around and up in the top, and you'll see that big green dome. Okay, he was up there. That was the top turret gun. Then as you come through the radio operator's room, you can't see it from the outside of the aircraft. But on the inside, there's a gun that comes, they take the window out in the ceiling, comes down on a rail and shoots out through the top of the aircraft. Your radio operator controlled that one. Then you have a ball turret gunner. A guy actually sat in that little ball. And then you have 2 waist gunners, one on each side of the aircraft, and a tail gunner. Tail gunner sat backwards on his knees for up to 8 to 10 hours at a time. Okay, so the 4 guys in the front, your Bombardier navigator, pilot, and co-pilot, were officers. So as a general rule, they ranged in age between 22 to 25. The rest of the crew ranged in age between 17 to 19. A mission could last anywhere from 8 to 10 hours. The further we went into Germany. This one was in the Pacific, like I said, but a great deal of the bombers were in the European theater flying out of England. So we are friends with the 357th Bomb Group. They have their reunions with us. So we painted the aircraft to represent the aircraft they flew out of Black, England. So a typical mission, 8 to 10 hours. The number of, everybody says, how many bombs did it carry? It's not number, it's weight. She could carry a maximum of 8,000 pounds. But the further you went into Europe, the more fuel you needed, the smaller the bomb load got. So typically 6,000 pounds, which is nothing compared to what today does. Nothing. So it was a total of a 10-man crew. The crew generally stayed together unless you lost someone on the mission. They generally tried to stay together. If you watch the movie Memphis Belle, you think everybody got to come home after 25 missions. Memphis Belle came home in early 1942 because we were losing the war and we needed heroes. So they brought the Belle home so that they could put the crew on the war bond tour. After the Belle came home, they realized if they let everybody come home after 25 missions, we'd have no one left. So then they upped it to 35 missions. And because that meant you had to go from your home base to the target, drop your bombs and back. If you got halfway there and got jumped by fighters and got shot up and couldn't make it, it didn't count. If you got halfway there and had a mechanical problem and had to turn around and go home, that mission didn't count. And then, of course, we all know that the government does such a good job with math, a lot of times they just, didn't get that right. So a lot of these guys did a lot more than 35. And I've been a crew member for 37 years. Over the years, I've met gentlemen who have brought me their flight logs, and they stayed and did more than 50 missions. And when you ask them, you can go home after 35. Or you were shot down and evaded the enemy and got back to England. That gave you enough points to go home. Why didn't you go home? And they'll give me one of three answers. My country needed me. We had to win that war. If I didn't do it, somebody else was going to have to. So that's what makes that generation our heroes. Because without them, they fought it. I used to teach school and I tell kids all the time, we are fighting a war now. My son went to Iraq. The day he left, he knew the day he would come home, God willing. These kids, there was an old song during World War II, will be back when it's over there. My father left for the Pacific in the Navy and came home 4 years. So this generation left not having any idea when they would ever get home again, if they would get home again. But with such dedication and love for our country that they knew we had to win that war in order to be free. So that's why they are called the greatest generation. And if you'd like to walk around the aircraft a little bit, I can do that too.
Well, I was going to ask you now, how long have you all actually done this and going on tours and things?
We purchased the aircraft, or got the aircraft in 1976. I personally came on board in 1984, so they'd already done all the restoration. I've crewed, like I said, for coming up on 37 years. I've crewed. I go out every summer for at least 2 weeks. I've been out as many as 7 weeks, for punishment. But we are all volunteers. We actually pay $250 a year to volunteer. So everybody that's out here, so any money that we make or take in for tours or whatever goes directly back into the aircraft. We burn 200 gallons of fuel an hour. We put 37 gallons of oil behind each engine, so that's 4 engines. And so we figure that it costs about $3,200 an hour to fly her.
Now,
Yeah, I tell men, she's like every pretty woman you've ever known. She's lovely to look at, she's expensive, she's high maintenance, and she's temperamental.
well, so now, Shelby, I know you've been doing this since in the 80s. Where all do you go for these tours?
Well, we have a committee back home of volunteers that set up the tours. So what they do is they'll just call a city and say, hey, would you like us to come, and can you help us out at all? like, can we get hotels rooms donated, or can somebody afford to give us some fuel or something like that? Because, like I say, she's expensive. But we've literally been all over I personally have been to every state in the United States with the exception of Hawaii and Alaska on this aircraft, and I have been all the way across Canada. So it just depends. Every year we go someplace new. I was here several years ago at this airport. We try not to go back to the same airport for, say, like 3 years in between, but, it's all judged on the crowd who comes out. We have a committee that just decides, I get a phone call and say, you have an airline ticket, you're flying too. And I get on, and then in 2 weeks, they'll call me and say, okay, you're flying home from, and I go home from there. We're just gypsies.
Well, it's a wonderful thing that you all do to keep the history alive. And my goodness, there's no better way than to do what you all are doing. I mean, the young children are here, I see, going through this plane and just learning about it.
We have every age group, and it's really wonderful when we have a World War II vet come out. I just met a gentleman today that flew B-29s. And if you've looked at our Bombay doors, all the signatures on the Bombay doors, when we meet crewmen from B-17s, it doesn't matter what B-17 or what theater, but we have them sign our doors as our wall of honor. So those are our heroes in there. Yeah.
Now, where's the next place you're going? Or do you know?
I flew in yesterday, and I don't have a clue where I'm going Monday.
So that you're here, but you're here for the next few days.
We'll be here. We'll fly out Monday morning. We generally fly into a city on Monday, and we had a crew change. And then we'll be here, and we'll have ground tours through Thursday. Then Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, we try to do all the flights. So if you want to see it fly, that's a good day to come back out. And yeah, it makes a lot of noise. And we do mosquito fogging in the off season. And then Monday we'll fly on to the next city.
That's okay. You'll find out before you go. This is
I don't care. I go wherever I go. Yeah, I am one of the crew, so my crew is
You said how many crew is
during the war, it had a 10-man crew. We have to have a 4-person mandatory crew today. That's pilot, co-pilot, flight crew chief, and loadmaster.
Well, again, this is awesome. Thank you so much for telling us all about this.
I wish COVID wasn't going on because I'd love to come and meet all you great folks, but